No, I just wanted to hear about you were involved in some nuclear testing.
About what?
Some nuclear weapons testing.
Oh, we were involved in a study trying to estimate how much radiation dose the Japanese people received when the Hiroshima weapon was dropped.
Uh-huh.
So what we did, we built 6 houses in the desert in Nevada in the Japanese style, just like Japanese construction.
Mm-hmm.
And we fitted these houses with radiation detectors. See, when the weapon was dropped in August of 1945, nobody had radiation detectors in Japan, you know.
Yeah.
We didn't. Anyway, so we built these houses in the Japanese style, fitted them with radiation detectors,
Yeah.
and then had a duplicate weapon built like the Hiroshima weapon
Mm-hmm.
that was tethered from a balloon
Mm-hmm.
hanging over these houses at the same altitude that the bomb in Hiroshima was detonated at, 2,000 feet or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then the bomb was exploded, and we dashed in with all that smoke and dust still swirling around
Oh God.
to recover these radiation detectors
Uh-huh.
and to get an estimate of what the Japanese people received
Yeah.
during the weapon explosion. And there was a lot of illness. Leukemia, the incidence of leukemia went way up among the survivors in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I never will forget that.
So were you well
I
protected?
stood on the running board of the truck while my friend drove the truck, and he would slam on the brakes in front of each one of these houses, and I would dash in and grab the radiation detectors and throw them in the bed of the truck, and we'd go to the next house and do the same thing all over again.
Yeah.
And we had masks on because the dust was just
Uh-huh.
everywhere.
Right.
And
But not what they would consider sufficient protection.
Mm-hmm.
They wouldn't consider that sufficient protection these days, probably.
oh, I don't think so. I'm sure I got a fair amount of radiation during those weapons tests. I've developed a lot of skin cancer,
Uh-huh.
and your Uncle Robert died from one of the cancers,
Mm-hmm.
melanoma.
That's
I've had a
right.
melanoma also.
Oh, really?
And
Early detection?
Hmm?
It was detected early?
I hope so. I've still got my fingers crossed.
Uh-huh.
I really think that it could have come from being exposed to sun in South Carolina. Because
Uh-huh.
every year when school was out, I would take my shirt off,
Yeah.
put it back on for Sunday school, take it off again, and by the end of the summer, I was black from the
Uh-huh.
sun every year. And the tops of my ears were the first things that got burned every year.
Yeah.
And that's exactly where the melanoma was, on the helix of my right ear.
Uh-huh.
It took about a square inch of my ear away during the surgery.
Oh, wow.
And
When was that?
2007. That was in November of 2007. And I went back to the doctor every 3 months for about a year, and then every 6 months for another 3 or 4 years, and then I go back only once a year now to be checked.
Okay.
But I've got my fingers crossed. Now, your Uncle Robert, his melanomas were on his back, and
He was a lifeguard.
yeah, and that metastasized. I think it was 11 years between the time he had the melanoma and the time that he developed the brain tumors.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Oh, I didn't realize that.
and I talked to my surgeon and told him that I had a nephew that had a melanoma, and it took 11 years to metastasize. I said, "Is that unusual?" He said, "No." He said, "Actually, I've seen one case where it took 25 years to metastasize."
So that's after you've had it physically removed, it can still metastasize?
Oh, yeah. Well, melanomas are very prone to metastasize. In fact, I had one of my doctors tell me that once the melanoma has grown big enough to see with your eye, it probably has already metastasized. So I've got my fingers crossed.
Right.
But I've got so many medical problems. I've got heart trouble. I've got 6 lung problems.
6 lung problems, but you only got 2 lungs.
Asbestosis from exposure to asbestos.
Really?
COPD, emphysema, pleural plaques and pleural thickening, and asthma.
Were you a smoker?
Well, during the war I smoked. I was not a smoker before the war, but our platoon leader didn't make us smoke, but he advised us to smoke. He said it'll help your nerves. And cigarettes were free.
Right.
We got cigarettes in every one of our rations.
Right.
So I smoked. And then that was 1944, 1945. And then I continued to smoke after Jane and I got married. And then in 1956 or 57, when I learned that smoking was bad for you, I quit.
Oh, good for you.
I got sent to, I was doing some teaching for the World Health Organization. And I was sent to India for 3 months in Bombay. Well, now they call it Mumbai, I think. And I remember when I got on the plane to go over there, I bought a carton of cigarettes. And I remember telling myself that when I finish this carton of cigarettes, that's it. I'm not going to smoke anymore.
Right.
And if I'm in India and try to quit and am not able to kick the habit, I don't have to confess when I get back home and tell them that I tried and failed. But I remember smoking that last cigarette in India, and I got an Indian cigarette, and boy, that cured me. That was the worst cigarette I have ever smoked. Really bad.
No filter?
Anyway, I haven't smoked since.
Okay.
1957. Jane continued to smoke until 1963, when the United States Surgeon General came out and said that smoking is bad for you. And that's when they started putting warnings on the back of cigarette packages. And she wouldn't listen to me about cigarettes being bad, but she listened to the Attorney General. So even though I quit in 1957, she continued to smoke until 1963, and then she quit.
Right.
She quit cold turkey also.
Well, that's good.
Yeah. That fellow that I was just waving at him that was in a motorized wheelchair, he was on his way out to smoke. I've been trying to get him to stop, but he said he can't kick the habit.
So how'd you get exposure to asbestos? How did you get exposure to asbestos?
Working with it. We worked with asbestos. It was an insulator.
For nuclear?
Our vacuum systems, we had to bake to heat to drive the gas off the walls. And all of our ovens were asbestos insulated. And when you used heating tape to wrap around equipment that we had to heat, heating tape was coated with asbestos. And we had asbestos clothes and asbestos gloves. We didn't know asbestos was bad for you.
Right.
This was back in the 1950s.
So this was radioactive gas that you were trying to get rid of?
No, it had nothing to do with radioactivity.
No, the gas.
Just as an insulator, thermal heat insulator. And
But for ovens, for what though?
it would asbestos flakes off into little chips.
No, my question, yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, one of the fellows that I worked with also developed asbestosis. And his, about 6 or 8 years ago, he started having really serious lung problems, and he went to the Mayo Clinic up in Rochester, Minnesota.
Yeah.
And he was diagnosed with a particularly bad form of cancer, which comes from asbestos. It's called mesothelioma.
I've heard of that.
Yeah. And he died about 2 years ago. And my lung doctor, the pulmonologist that is treating all my lung problems, it was diagnosed. I had surgery. They made some incisions and took samples of my lung tissue. That's where the diagnosis came from.
Is mesothelioma, is that where is mesothelioma, is that where your immune system attacks yourself or something?
It's a lung cancer, and it is closely associated with exposure to asbestos. I'm sure you've seen TV ads about melanoma. There are a lot of lawyers around the country that are trying to
Melanoma is a skin cancer.
Mesothelioma.
Melanoma is a skin cancer. The stuff from asbestos is
Meso-
mesothelioma.
I'm
Mesothelioma.
not talking about melanoma, I'm talking about mesothelioma.
Yeah, yeah,
I'm sorry.
yeah.
Just want to make sure he hears
I've had the melanoma. I'm worried about mesothelioma.
Yeah.
Herman died from mesothelioma.
Okay.
And
But,
my surgeon, not surgeon, but my lung pulmonologist is quite concerned that mine may develop into mesothelioma. So I have to get checked every 4 months. I get a CT scan of my chest.
but okay. Well, what was the insulation for?
Heat, thermal insulation, heat.
For what?
We had to bake our vacuum systems to drive the gas off the wall. We had to heat all the vacuum systems.
What gas?
Had heaters around them to raise the temperature, to drive the gas off the walls to get a higher vacuum.
What gas?
Oxygen, whatever's in the air.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I got you.
Vacuum pumps can pump gas out, but gas molecules adhere to the wall of the vacuum system. The only way to get them off is to heat the system and drive them off.
I see.
And that's where we use these ovens to heat it. And the ovens were insulated with asbestos.
Ah, okay. I got
And then
you.
we used tape, these narrow tapes that had heating elements in it, wound around the outside of the vacuum systems. And those tapes were also insulated with asbestos.
Right.
But like we said, we didn't know asbestos was bad for you back in the 1950s.
So what was the back to the nuclear test? Didn't you like write your name in a piece of wood? Back to the nuclear test with the bombs of the Japanese houses. Didn't you do a thing where you had like a wooden block and you wrote your name on it or something?
Yeah, how'd you find out about that?
No, you told me about it not too long ago.
Oh, did I?
Last time you came to visit.
Yeah,
Or maybe it was your daughter that told me about it.
I got some little pieces of wood, and I got foil, and we had a machine that you could cut numbers and letters in the foil. And I wrote my name on there with the date of the weapons test and put it over the wood and I did it for my name, and I had 2 children at that time. My youngest son, David, was not born yet, but John and Ann, I made a plaque with them with their names on it. And I put these out in front of these houses, and when the weapon went off, the thermal energy from the weapon burned the names where the aluminum foil had been cut out. So I've got these pieces of wood with our names burned into it from the thermal heat from the radiation from the weapon.
Wow.
Mine survived and John's survived, but Ann's got broken during the explosion. I only found half of it. And I've given it to her. It's over at my house. I'd show it to you, but I don't have it with me.
Okay.
Yeah, that was an interesting thing. That was really a nice souvenir from those days.
Jeez.
That was in October of 1957, I think.
Okay, so this was well after the war then.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So when did you joined, hold on just a second.